I'm really interested in exploring how to or approaches to memorizing large bodies of information,
Hmm.
like let's say epic poems or let's say books or procedure manuals at work or like um, history. I'm interested in how do you memorize text verbatim and how do you memorize large bodies of information. So there's a lot of at least from my experience and what I've read, there's a lot of books on how to memorize numbers, cards, names and faces, but there's not a lot of books on how to memorize text or verbatim or how to memorize history in a very deep and profound, detailed way and how to manage palaces. So I'm interested in exploring that realm. So I do a lot of experimentation as well, experimenting, taking notes.
Mm.
Um, and I'm also interested in the practical aspects of memory. So how to apply memory in at work, um, in your studies, and also I'm interested in memory training. So
Mm.
how do you train your memory? What are some of the techniques, the strategies to be more effective in your memory training? So those are some of my interests, but I'm actually interested in everything about memory. But
Yeah,
yeah,
sounds like that. So, yeah, you talked about text. And that there are not so many books about it. So it's quite tough also to find something here. So you might have to build up your own strategies here somehow. And a while ago, you sent me a message that you also were memorizing parts of the Bible. I'm not sure if you're still into that. But can you give us a bit of an insight how you approach that and what kind of texts you already memorized?
yeah. So I'm memorizing the Bible. And as you know, there's a lot of chapters in the Bible, so I had to think a lot about how to structure memory palaces and also how to undertake such a large project. And one of my interests is not only being able to memorize, but also the experience of memorizing. So also I think about so like reflection and meditation
Hmm.
on text. So I'm not only thinking about the memory palace, but how do I experience the act of recalling? So I'll just give you one example. So I've memorized Galatians. So one thing I do is I was inspired by urban planning, some of the techniques in urban planning. So one thing they say is that we first shape our cities and then our cities shape us.
Hmm.
So they understand how physical structures can impact human behavior. So we describe cities as fast or as slow, um, or as dead or as alive. Um, and all of that is rooted in how an architect and urban planner designed a city. So I was thinking, well, how can I apply this to memory palaces and memorizing texts? And one thing is that I read some literature on musical cities in which they compared cities to musical composition. So so let's say where you have an open space where there's more landscape and there's more rest, and then you have a place that's more concentrated with urban activities and it's live, and it's a way like a musical composition in the sense that there's ups and downs, there's highs and lows, there's dynamics. So when I approached the text of Galatians, I wanted to approach it, well, how do I experience the text? So I structured it. So when I went into chapter one, I used a palace that reminded me of hospitality. So the first part of the text is welcoming me into the text. So I would use a friend's house that was very hospitable to me. And then when I get to the end of the text, I would use a palace that was related to eating. So
Hmm.
like a restaurant or uh, a, a place in which I remembered I had a good meal. So I was invited into the text. And then once I leave the text, I'm invited to eat the text or to digest the material. And also, when I'm thinking about memorizing a text, I'm also thinking about reflecting upon the text. So when we're thinking about uh, getting from point A to point B, we also have to think about the experience. So, like you have a car and you have a bike. You have to ask the question, well, why do some people prefer bikes over cars? Isn't cars more effective? But when you have bikes, yes, it's not as fast as a car, but there's certain things about the transportation of a bike that you don't have in a car. So, for example, with a bike, you can be more meditative. You're avoiding traffic. You can be less frustrated. Um, there's you could say less pollution in the air. There's less noise from the honking of horns. So there's different types of experiences you have. So I had that same thing. Well, thinking in the mind of an urban planner, how do I design the palaces? So I was thinking, so once I eat the text and digest it, now I want to reflect on the text as if I'm riding a bike. So after each chapter, I would have a palace of a garden, and this garden would have a fountain, and then in each location, I would have certain categories. So let's say family, work, culture. So I would say, okay, I'm digesting the text, and then I'm now in this garden and it's filled with light, and now it is more reflective. So how does this text apply to family? How does this text apply to work? So then I
Hmm.
would walk through that garden, and then after I exit that garden, then I go into chapter two, and then I'm welcomed by another palace of hospitality. So it follows this pattern. It's like a symmetrical. So
Hmm.
eating, so it's being welcomed, eating, reflecting, welcomed, eating, reflecting. So it sort of has that movement. So those are some of the things I think about.
Wow. This is very impressive to also hear your level of reflection on how you are going to do why you are doing it, because it's I think it's also yeah quite common that people sometimes just take the text, they take a memory palace, and then they go for it. But it looks like that, or as far as I understand, is that the memory palace is a projection of your experience of the text. Is it? Can I summarize it a bit like that?
Yes. So when you think of any art, so this is a craft, it's an
Uh
art.
huh.
It deals with creativity. So when you think of photographers, they go out of their way to travel to a certain place, to a certain city, just to capture a moment,
Mm-hmm.
just to capture a place. In a way, I view myself as a person who likes to capture places. So let's say I'm getting to a text, and this text is very monumental. So I would go out of my way to find what palace would best capture the majesty of this text. So perhaps I would go to a very beautiful and expansive building. So once I enter into that text, I'm being enamored by the majesty and the beauty, not only of the text, but
Mm-hmm.
also the memory palace in which I stored the text.
Mm-hmm.
So I also incorporate, yes, experience. So if there's places of darkness in the text, I would seek for a place. What are places that are dark or remind me of lows? So so I'm also thinking about the terrain, so sort of like the landscape of the palace. So it sort of have these different colors, different
Hmm.
movements, highs and lows, sort of like a musical composition.
And for example, in a couple of years ago, there was a competition in China, and we had to memorize in advance a text, and that was The Art of War, the very widely known book. I'm not sure if you have read it or heard. I think you heard about it. And
Mhm.
let's let's make it practical. How would you choose your memory palace for that specific book? And would you go there physically? So would you just try to imagine it, like looking up some photos in the internet, or would you go to that specific spot? How does it look like?
So you're asking how would I approach memorizing the art of war?
Yes, exactly. And in a
Okay.
practical way. So you have this book now and you have read it or not. Now you have to read it, of course. You get something from it and then you choose your memory palace and then you go there, really travel there, or how would you approach that?
Yeah, so when I'm trying to memorize a book, so I for the art of war, I wouldn't memorize it by like word for word, text verbatim, but I would probably do the approach. I would memorize all of the content in each of the chapters. I haven't read the art
Yeah,
of
of
war,
course.
but
Yeah.
um so my approach is, well, first I would look at the table of contents
Mm-hmm.
and I would look at the outline of the book. So I don't know, let's say it has 10 chapters. And then usually it has subpoints,
Mm-hmm.
like what each chapter deals with. So what I would do is that each chapter would have a memory palace.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would string these. So let's say you have chapter one, you have chapter two, three, and so on. Well, what I typically do is I also use the peg system in conjunction with the
Mm-hmm.
memory palace. So let's say in chapter one, um, I would call it chapter 1A. So in chapter one, which is A, would consist of many different palaces. So let's say it's A1. So that's palace one under the category of A. A2, palace number two under A, three, and so on. So I would attach numbers to each of the palaces.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say um, you have A, Palace one, I would use my number for one
Mm-hmm.
on my major system. Palace two is sun, I would use my image for sun. And then I would perhaps cover the house with some sun imagery. Perhaps
Mm-hmm.
the house is burning up in flames or it's looking like a sun. So so if I were to go into chapter one, I first just read through it. I try to get the general understanding of it. And then each palace, I would put a subpoint in it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say chapter one, you have uh paragraph, one through whatever. Then I would have a palace for that. That's A1. Then I
Yeah.
go to subpoint two, then it's A2. Then subpoint three, then it's A3. And then I string those palaces together. So you can sort of think of it like a necklace.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm stringing all of those palaces together. And then I would continue that with the entire book. So chapter two would be B, and I would do B1, B2, B3, and so on.
And this palace is a real place, like a friend's house, for example.
Yes. So I would use any place, my house, a friend's house.
So real places you know already, and then you would imagine yourself using, going there and using these palaces.
Yes, and depending on the content of the text, it would
Mm.
determine what type of place I would choose.
Yeah.
But I typically choose real places.
Yes. And because I get this question very often, um, how do I get new places? Because I always have the answer. It's not so difficult because you know already so many places. You have been in your life to many places. Just try to think about where I have been. Any tips for that? How to say, I have a catalog or a list of palaces. How can I come up with that? What is your tip for that?
The my tip would be first to change your the way you think about yourself, your identity,
Mm-hmm.
is that you are an architect.
Mm-hmm.
When you look when you view yourself in a different way, an architect they look for places to build things, right? So when you change your identity, I am an architect, meaning that every place that you go, you're on your architect mode that, oh, is this a potential palace that I could use? So I would say, if let's say you're invited to eat somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
try to be more intentional. So if you go to one particular restaurant or fast food place like Chick-fil-A or Olive Garden, say, well, this week I'm not going to go to Olive Garden. I'm going to try somewhere else. So be intentional. Don't always go to the same place. Try to visit as many places as you can. And also my other recommendation is to think back in your past. So go all the way from your childhood and think about every single place you've ever possibly visited. So
Mm-hmm.
it may not be extremely clear, and that's fine. I would say that you can always use your imagination to structure it in such a way. But I would think of every single place you visited, and then I would say be intentional by actually traveling to visit places to build memory palaces. So let's say you have a mall, go to that mall, walk around the stores. If you want, you could take pictures and make it a point. Like every 2 weeks, I'm gonna go to the mall and I'm gonna visit a different store, or I'm gonna go to this grocery store on this side of town and I'm going to build palaces, and you view yourself as, I am a palace collector, I am
Mm-hmm.
an architect, and then create a spreadsheet notebook and just list all of the palaces. So that would be my recommendation.
It's really nice to see it like this because let's say if you would be an artist and you go to an artist gallery, someone like this would of course experience this place in a different way. He or she would like see, okay, this picture is from 1792 or whatever, and the artist behind that is this person, and and we are as memory athletes or memory experts or however you want to call it are people who use the whole world to create memory palaces or use memory palaces. And everywhere we go, I mean, an architect who builds buildings also sees every building differently, doesn't he? So he goes somewhere in a new city and he sees, okay, this looks interesting and this looks interesting. For us, we could, as you said it, intentionally go to a place and say, let's see how that looks like, how it feels, how it is your experience there. Can I connect it maybe at some point to a book? Because it's like a fast food restaurant, so maybe I read a book about fast food. Nah, bad example, but I know you know what I mean. So very
Yeah.
very interesting, and yeah, a very nice approach. We have a viewer here, Vian Hamor, didn't recognize
Hey.
Ron without glasses and less beard. Lol.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Also one more point on that
Mm-hmm.
is also I view memory techniques as material. So like as silver, as gold, as wood, as bricks. The more knowledge you have of the materials, the better you can build the foundation or the structure
Mm-hmm.
of your memory. So if I'm learning about the peg system or the link method or the Kermode method or phonetic systems, anything that you learn is as if you're gathering material like to better construct more stable buildings that would store your information so that the winds of forgetfulness won't pound upon your structure and then break the foundation. So that's why I say viewing yourself as an architect is
Yeah,
important.
it's a matter of mindset. Like last week when I talked to Pratik, it was also he was saying like it's a matter of mindset that I'm a memory athlete. I don't forget things. So it's a very nice or a very good way to approach these things. And what I also found very interesting with when you talked about it, your fountain, your garden after each chapter. To me it sounds like a place where you have specific spots in this garden around the fountain, and it sounds like you are mentally sitting down there in the family place and reflecting on what does this text say me about the topic of family. Is it like that? So it's like a garden, a place with
It's
specific spots and topics in each corner.
Well, it's also the symbolic. It's also the symbolism. So, the garden is associated with life, and then water, the cleansing of the mind, and also you have light. So light is often associated with knowledge and truth. So it's the light of knowledge. I'm being bathed in the light of knowledge. I'm being cleansed in my mind.
Mm.
I'm flourishing as a human being by pursuing virtue, by reflecting upon these texts. So it's also the symbolic factors. And I also do that. So like in certain locations, I would insert songs.
Hmm.
So like let's say there's a particular text that reminds me of this. I would I also do like I insert imaginary things. So I insert a button. So I press on the button and then a song plays. Or let's say there's a work of art that reminds me of something. I would hang up that work of art. So as I'm in that locus, I can look at that work of art and further reflect upon whatever passage.
Mm.
So I also do that as well. So I would say symbolism is a very important element in my memory palace construction.
Katie is asking if we can have you here every week because it's so fascinating. Let's see. But one thing also what came to my mind, a meditation. Did you do meditation, practice meditation before you started with memory? And do you think what you do now is meditation?
No, so I meditate on scripture.
Hmm.
Um so I've been doing that, and I would say that meditation is important. Um that I think one of the skills of memory is the ability to be focused and to have the ability to focus on one singular topic
Hmm.
and sort of uh diffusing every distraction that comes in your way to be laser focused on this one thing. So yes, I do have a habit of meditation. So yeah, I have done that before memory sports or um memorizing in general.
Hmm.